Hi, we're going to do the second part of the monkey's paw. So let's do chapter 2. In the brightness of the wintry sun next morning, as it steamed over the breakfast table, he laughed at his fears. There was an air of phenomenal wholesomeness about the room which it had lacked on the previous night, and a dirty, shriveled little paw was pinched on the sideboard with a carelessness which betokened no great belief in its virtues. "I suppose all old soldiers are the same," said Miss White. "The idea of our listening to such nonsense! How could wishes be granted in these days? And if they could, how could £200 hurt you, father?" "It might drop on his head from the sky," said the frivolous Herbert. "Morris said that things happen so naturally," said his father, "that you might, if you so wished, attribute to its consequence." "Well, don't break into the money before I come back," said Herbert, as he rose from the table. "I'm afraid it'll turn you into a mean, avaricious man, and we shall have to disown you." His mother laughed and followed him to the door, watched him down the road, and returning to the breakfast table, she was very happy with the expense of her husband's credulity, all of which did not prevent her from scurrying to the door at the postman's knock, nor prevent her from referring somewhat shortly to retired sergeants majors of bibulous habits when she found that the post brought a tailor's bill. "Herbert will have some more of his funny remarks, I expect, when he comes home," she said, as they sat at dinner. "I dare say," said Mr. White, pouring himself out some beer. "But for all that, the thing moved in my hand, that I swear to." "You thought it did," said the old lady smoothly. "I say it did," replied the other. "There was no thought that I had just—" "What's the matter?" His wife made no reply. She was watching the mysterious movement of the man outside, who, peering in an undecided fashion at the house, appeared to be trying to make up his mind to enter. In mental connection with the £200, she noticed that the stranger was well dressed and wore a silk hat of glossy newness. 3 times he paused at the gate, and then walked on again. The 4th time he stood with his hand upon it, then, with sudden resolution, flung it open and walked up the path. Miss White at the same moment placed her hands behind her and hurriedly unfastened the strings of her apron, put that useful article of apparel beneath the cushion of her chair. She brought the stranger, who seemed ill at ease, into the room. He gazed at her furiously and listened in a preoccupied fashion. The old lady apologized for the appearance of the room, and her husband's coat, a garment which usually referred for the garden. She then waited for as patiently as her sex would permit for him to broach his business, but he was at first strangely silent. "I was asked to call," he said at last, and stooping and picked a piece of cotton from his trousers. "I came from Ma and Megan's." The old lady started. "Is anything the matter?" She asked breathlessly. "Has anything happened to Herbert?" "What is it? What is it?" Her husband interposed. There, mother, he said hastily. Sit down and don't jump to conclusions. You are not brought bad news, I'm sure, sir. And he eyed the other wistfully. I'm sorry, began the visitor. Is he hurt? Demanded the mother wildly. The visitor bowed in assent. Badly hurt, he said quietly, but he is not in any pain. Oh, thank God, said the woman, clasping her hands. Thank God for that. She broke off suddenly as the sinister meaning of the assurance dawned upon her, and she saw the awful confirmation of her fears in the other's averted face. She caught her breath and, turning to her slower-witted husband, lay her trembling old hand upon his. There was a long silence. He was caught in the machinery, said the visitor at length in a low voice. Caught in the machinery, repeated Miss White in a dazzled fashion. Yes. He sat staring blankly out of the window, and, taking his wife's hand between his own, pressed it as if he had been wont to do in the old courting days for nearly 40 years before. He was the only one left to us, he said, turning gently to the visitor. It is hard. The other coughed and rising, walked slowly to the window. The firm wished me to convey their sympathetic sympathy with you in your great loss, he said, without looking round. I beg that you will understand. I am their servant, and merely obeying orders. There was no reply. The old woman's face was white, her eyes staring, and her breath inaudible. On the husband's face was a look such as his friend, the surgeon, might have carried into his first action. I was to say that Ma and Megan's disclaim all responsibility, concluded the other. They admit no liability at all, but in consideration of the sun service, they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation. Mr. White dropped his wife's hands, and rising to his feet, gazed with a look of horror at his visitor. His dry lips shaped the words. How much? 200 pounds, was the answer. Unconscious of his wife's shriek, the old man smiled faintly. He put out his hands like a sightless man and dropped, a senseless heap, to the floor. So now we know that he has made his first wish, and now we know what the consequence to that. So what's going to happen in the third chapter? On the second wish and the third wish, we won't know yet until tomorrow. So I will finish this tomorrow, and have a great day. Bye!